Today is Wednesday, March 25th, 2026, and today is National Waffle Day, which feels like a holiday created by someone who looked at pancakes and thought, these are fine, but what if we added structural engineering? Welcome to This Day in History from, wait, that's random. I'm your host, C.L. Burns. On this day in 1634, English settlers arrived at St. Clement's Island in what would become the colony of Maryland. The expedition was led by Leonard Calvert, who had been appointed governor by his brother, Cecil Calvert, also known as Lord Baltimore. The Calvert family had received a royal charter from King Charles I to establish the colony. The idea behind Maryland was a little different from some of the other English colonies. While many colonies had strong religious identities, like Puritan Massachusetts, Maryland was originally intended as a place where English Catholics could practice their faith with fewer restrictions. Religious conflict had been intense in England for decades, and the Calverts hoped Maryland could become a colony where Catholics and Protestants could coexist. Now, in practice, things were still complicated. Power struggles, politics, and economic interests always played a role. But Maryland did pass one of the earliest laws in the colonies aimed at protecting religious tolerance. The Maryland Toleration Act of 1649 allowed Christians of different denominations to worship without fear of legal punishment, which at the time was a fairly unusual idea. The colony itself began modestly. The settlers first landed on a small island, raised a cross, held a Catholic Mass, and then soon moved to the mainland where they founded the settlement of St. Mary's City. Sometimes entire colonies start with a handful of ships and a place to land. Nearly 3 centuries later, March 25th would become associated with one of the most tragic industrial disasters in American history. On this date in 1911, a fire broke out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City. The factory occupied the upper floors of the Ash Building in Manhattan. Inside, hundreds of garment workers, mostly young immigrant women, were sewing women's blouses known as shirtwaists. Factories like this operated under intense production pressure. Workers often sat in long rows of sewing machines, surrounded by piles of fabric scraps, thread, and oil used to maintain the equipment. All of that material was extremely flammable. When the fire started, it spread rapidly through the room. But the real disaster came from the building's safety conditions. Some exit doors had been locked by managers. The reason was simple. Factory owners wanted to prevent workers from taking unauthorized breaks or stealing fabric. But when the fire began, those locked doors trapped many workers inside. Elevators could only make a few trips before the heat made them unusable. Fire ladders were too short to reach the upper floors. Some workers tried to escape by jumping from the windows. In total, 146 people died. The public reaction was immediate and intense. New York launched investigations that revealed unsafe working conditions across many factories. Within a few years, dozens of new workplace safety laws were introduced, including requirements for fire exits, sprinklers, and improved building codes. In other words, a terrible tragedy forced a major shift in how industrial workplaces were regulated. Now we jump forward 70 years, and to think that in 70 years we went from that to NASA delivering the Space Shuttle Columbia to Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Columbia was the first truly operational orbiter of NASA's new Space Shuttle program. The concept behind the shuttle was very different from earlier spacecraft. Before the shuttle era, most spacecraft were single-use rockets. Once they launched and completed their mission, most of the hardware was discarded. NASA wanted something reusable. The shuttle system was designed to launch like a rocket, orbit the Earth like a spacecraft, and then glide back down through the atmosphere to land on a runway like an airplane. The orbiter itself carried astronauts, cargo, and scientific experiments. Large external fuel tanks powered the launch, while 2 massive solid rocket boosters helped lift the shuttle into space. After launch, the boosters parachuted into the ocean where they could be recovered and reused. The orbiter would then re-enter the atmosphere protected by thousands of heat-resistant tiles. It was an incredibly complex engineering system. And while the program had both successes and tragedies over the decades, the shuttle became one of the most recognizable spacecraft designs in history. And speaking of powerful voices, Aretha Franklin was born on this day in 1942. She would eventually become known as the Queen of Soul and one of the most influential singers in American music. Franklin grew up singing gospel in Detroit and developed a voice that combined technical precision and extraordinary emotional power. Songs like Respect, Chain of Fools, and Natural Woman helped define the sound of American soul music in the 1960s. But her influence went beyond music. Her performances became closely tied to the civil rights movement and broader cultural change during that era. Sometimes a voice becomes more than entertainment. Sometimes it becomes part of the soundtrack of history. And when you step back and look at these moments together, something interesting appears. The Colony begins with an idea about religious tolerance. The factory fire forces the creation of workplace safety laws. And a reusable spacecraft arrives that changes how humans travel to space. Different centuries, different problems. But each moment shows how society adjusts when the old systems stop working. Anyway, those are a few of the things I ended up discovering while wandering through March 25th. Stop by tomorrow and we'll see what other strange pieces of history the date decides to reveal. If you want to know more about me or the work I do, you can find everything at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and I appreciate you stopping by.